Hi, my name is Melissa Boyle and I'm the director of Rua Red. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this evening's lecture by our esteemed guest, Marina Warneris. Tonight's lecture is part of our active research programme, which is just one component of the Magdalene series at Rua Red, a series of exhibitions and events in response to the figure of Mary Magdalene. Over the course of the next few months, Rua Red will bring some of the foremost academics, activists, researchers, theologians, and feminists to speak about themes within the forthcoming exhibitions by artists Amanda Coogan, Maher, Fallon, Jones and Grace Dyas. I was first introduced to Marina's work as a student in 1993 when I was completely hooked on Alone of All Her Sex, the myth and cult of the Virgin Mary. And since then, Marina's writing has impacted massively on my work as an artist and curator in so many ways. I first met Marina in 2014 in London, where we spoke about an idea that I had for a series of commissions around Mariolatry and Mary Magdalene. And following this, we exchanged emails and met a few times in Dublin to discuss the development of the idea to where it is today, the Magdalene series. I am so delighted that those initial conversations have led to this evening and Marina being part of our active research programme. Marina is a writer of fiction and cultural history, myth and fairy tale. She is author of Alone of All Her Sex, the myth and cult of the Virgin Mary, Monuments and Maidens, the Allegory of the Female Form, and From the Beast to the Blonde, and fairy tales and their tellers, amongst many, many other works. Her new book, Inventory of a Life Mislaid, has just been published by HarperCollins. And during her archival research for the book, which explores her childhood in Egypt, Marina found an old map of Cairo. On it was marked the very spot where, quote, the real Balm is gathered. That gives me goosebumps. This set her off on a fascinating quest, which she uncovered legends about Mary Magdalene and her jar of precious oils, balm, and perfumes. In her lecture this evening, Marina will uncover the long associations of balm with the pleasures and solace of the East and explore religious concepts around women and sexual temptation. So, without further delay, I am delighted to extend a really warm welcome to Marina Warneris this evening. Marina will speak for approximately 50 minutes, and then following this, there will be time for questions. Can I advise you that you please put your questions, any questions that you have, into our Q&A section, which is the bottom of your screen. You can also join the conversation on Twitter, tagging Rua Red. Thank you so much, Marina, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. And oh, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Whoops. Anyway, thank you very, very much, Melissa. I'm really, really pleased to be taking part in this wonderful multidisciplinary series of events, and for our earlier conversations to have come to this point. And somehow it seems a kind of consolation in lockdown that we're still able to communicate and see one another, even if we're wraiths in the cybersphere. I started writing this book quite a long time ago, and it's called an inventory because it takes off from various objects that I found after my mother died, and my father had died before that, and they seem to be completely suffused with the lives they had led. And they had been to Cairo after the war, and where my father had started a bookshop. And so, and by kind of, you know, some kind of, so let me just get this sum up. By a series of meanders, which I hadn't really expected, I was led inevitably to female sexuality, to Mary Magdalene. And it led me in a very pleasurable quest. But the first point of call, so this is the Crivellis in the National Gallery, Rijksmuseum. And I'll come back to her jar. As you see here, she has a kind of beer tankard, and also her glorious, always very, very expensive, luxurious clothes. She is, as you all know, the artist, especially in the Rua Red project, a figure very often of sensation, sensuousness, sensuality, and sinful luxury. She often, when she appears in these extraordinarily powerful paintings, seems to be looking at us with an inviting look. And that inviting look is somehow connected
Marina,
to her. Yes.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but unfortunately we actually aren't seeing your slides right now. Would you mind just trying to reshare them?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Good, I'm glad you told me. Okay, sorry. We'll start again. All right. Okay, so I was telling you about the Crivelli. You heard what I said, and this is just by introduction. So I started, and here she is in the Luini. He's a follower of Leonardo, and you can see that she's giving this slightly sort of sly, foxy look, sort of knowing look as she lifts the lid of her jar. And in the Jan van Scorrel, again, she catches our eye, and there's some kind of complicity in her luxurious clothes. There's invitation there. I'll come back to that because the theme is about the jar and the ointment. But so the first point that I began my inventory with objects, as I said, and among them I found an old map. And on this old map, this is the cover of my book, on this old map of Cairo, which is the earliest panoramic map made in Venice of the city, made in 1549, there are a lot of very detailed indications of certain places, and they're mostly associated with pilgrimage sites, because there were a lot of Christian pilgrims going to Egypt. But they're also the antiquities and classical remains. So this is Matteo Pagano's version of the Sphinx. You can see he hadn't probably seen the Sphinx. Also his version of the pyramids. But it is a very informed map by pilgrims' reports and travelers' reports. And on that map, there is very clearly marked this Matarea, which was then a suburb of Cairo. It's now part of the city of Cairo. In this garden, you can gather the true balsam. And below that, the lodgings where the Madonna stayed when she fled to Egypt for fear of Herod. Well, my father had a copy of this book in his, a copy of a book in which this map was reproduced in his library. And this set me off on a quest to find out a lot more about this true balsam. And the true balsam was associated with the idea of balm in Gilead. I don't know if this phrase means anything to you. It turns up still in certain, proverbial contexts. And sometimes it means, give us some money. Some charities, for example, say, we need balm in Gilead, kind of save us, give us some support. The phrase comes in the Bible from Jeremiah, who's lambasting the Israelites for failing to worship the true God in Gilead. The Gileadites have slipped, lots of people in the Bible always backsliding in their faith. And he says, is there no balm in Gilead? And what he means by the balm is belief in God. But it became a phrase for an idea of solace, an idea of pleasure, an idea of being sustained, of being healed, of being looked after. And all through the centuries, people inspired by the Bible, they would look for what would be the true balm that was apparently growing in that garden in Matarea in Cairo. And this is, for example, is one of the many, many specimens. There are many examples and many varieties of specimens that is identified by a plant hunter, a Victorian plant hunter in the 19th century, as being the true balm of Gilead. The person most associated with true balm is, of course, Mary Magdalene, because that is what she carries in her jar, what she anoints Jesus's feet with. When my parents set out for Cairo, that is what they were looking for. They were looking for some kind of respite, some kind of pleasurable, gentler world than they found in the war-damaged city of London after the war. My mother had been born in 1922, the year Mussolini came to power. She married my father in 1944, the year Mussolini fell. Her entire life in Italy was spent under fascism. And she, as a member of a small, poor family, suffered from the corruption of the clergy and the corruption of the police and general oppression and corruption. So they were looking for something that would take them away from this world of harsh and poverty to some extent. Though my father was an English gentleman and my mother was a poverty-stricken Southern Italian, they were 15 years apart, and he had met her when he was in the 8th Army in fighting in Sicily and then in Southern Italy. They liberated Southern Italy from the Germans, and he met her because she volunteered to interpret. The Germans had destroyed all the maps and all the signs of street signs, and local people were used as interpreters to help the English and the Allies orient themselves. It was a very unlikely marriage. They only had 3 times together, never alone, before they got engaged. And as I said, he was 15 years older. She was brave. She undertook a new world. He found her black market tulle. She was very good at dressmaking, and she became a great beauty. In Italy, she had not been considered a great beauty because she was 5'10.5". And that was absolutely freakish in southern Italy. Most of the men were about 5'2", and her 3 sisters were all extremely small too. So she had not been, she was nicknamed La Giraffa, the giraffe. But when she married my father and became an English woman to some extent, and then went to Cairo, she blossomed and became this society figure in the clothes she made herself. And there in Cairo, they found this dolce vita, this sweet life, this balm in Gilead, if you like. And she attracted many, many suitors. And part of my book is an exploration without too much prurience of this self-discovery that she went through, because she left many diaries and many letters, and I was able, in a way, to try to be inhabited by her ghost and feel what she had felt in this glamorous world of plenty. And there was nothing, Cairo had not suffered in the war, and there was everything there which there wasn't in England, and I try to draw that contrast. So the awakening of a kind of sexuality in my very young mother is part of the theme of this book. And so this is part of the sort of luxurious life we led as a kind of colonial family. And the change of circumstances for her, these luxuries and this ease and sort of well-being. My father opened the bookshop, and there were two branches. So I set the excursion to the Garden of the True Balsam as one of the outings that the staff of the W.H. Smith, the bookshop was owned by W.H. Smith, undertook, because I found photographs of such outings. This is not the Garden of the True Balsam in this photograph, because that was an invention on my part. As far as I know, they didn't go there. But I wanted to investigate this metaphor, this figure of Balm in Gilead and the old map, and go through those portals into into the climate, the atmosphere, and the drama of their lives. So on the map, they also identify the fig tree, which is very, very ancient, about which it is said that the Madonna often rested in its shade. So there were various aspects of the garden that were connected to the story of the flight into Egypt. And this, I showed you this before, the lodgings where she stayed. And believe it or not, that place still exists. I mean, I'll show you photographs of it now. It is still on a pilgrimage route. And it had all the way through the centuries, people had visited the Garden of the True Balsam and made notes about it. So for example, here in an 18th century book, we have quite a good engraving of one of the bushes of the balm tree, the obelisk, which you saw in the previous image. That's no longer there anymore. It's probably brought to London or to Paris. But it were found by this Frenchman who did a pilgrimage to the Holy Land and carefully tracked all the different places that the Holy Family had been on the flight into Egypt. And he mentions the true balm, and he says that this is the balm that makes the chrism that is needed to be used for baptism. So the center in Matarea, where the balm was gathered, was actually sent all over Christendom for baptism. That has stopped, but it was the custom for a very long time. It had to be made in a particular way and used. I don't know if any of you have come across that in your, I mean, Ireland is one of the places to which it would have been sent, I imagine. So the true balm is not what I had imagined at all. I had thought that it would be a kind of lovely fragrant bush like basil or, coriander. Not at all. It's a vicious thorny tree that grows in exceptionally arid conditions. And in fact, its main habitat still is Yemen and Somalia, both extremely war-torn areas. So the price of the true balm, which is myrrh, has risen recently. In order to gather the true balm, you slash the trunk of the tree and the resin oozes out into these globules of, as you see, the aromatic globules. It's armed with vicious spikes. The engraving on the right captures that very well. And no animals, it has no predators except for goats. Goats have strong enough jaws or lips, if goats have lips, to chew on it. And the shepherds or the goat herds in those areas comb the resin out of the beards of their goats. And that's something that a classical source mentions. So that's a tradition that's been going for 1,000 years. And I love the idea of the goats' beards being combed for the myrrh that comes out of them. The trade in myrrh is extremely ancient. It's attributed by Pliny at the beginning to Queen Hatshepsut, who was the female pharaoh, the one who wore a beard to rule. And her tomb, which is now very damaged, but these are drawings made before the damage took hold, show at the very top there, you can see the transshipment of the myrrh trees that are being loaded onto her ships, along with all sorts of other luxuries, tigers and monkeys and other things that she desired in Egypt. She sent her ships to the land of Punt. We don't know where Punt was, but it's likely to be Somalia or Horn of Africa. And she brought back these treasures. And this is exactly the same way that plants are now transplanted. You know, they have to be brought with their root ball. You've probably planted, if you want to move a tree, you have to keep a big root ball. And you can see that she was already doing this. This is another painting by a woman of the tombs with, again, you can see here the transshipment of these myrrh trees. So after that, the myrrh industry and the balm industry was rooted in Cairo, in Egypt, near Heliopolis, actually, as it then was, the old capital, and flourished. And so that's where the garden is. It was associated with this very ancient trade of a culture which, as you know, was dedicated to embalming. Hatshepsut wanted myrrh because not only was it extraordinarily valuable as a commodity for trade, but also because her whole culture revolved around the preservation against mortal decay of her own body and other royal bodies and many animals. I mean, you will have all seen mummies of little animals and cats, and as well as human beings, and they still last, as we know, today, till today. That's because of the embalming skills of the ancient Egyptians. So the saint who's most associated, most deeply associated, I don't have to tell you, with anointing balm is Mary Magdalene. And it appears in various ways in her story. There's the scene where she washes the feet of Jesus with her tears and dries them with her hair, and then pours over his feet the expensive ointment that she's brought. And here you see in this painting, sort of sub-Rumors kind of painting, this scene. And the Pharisees, you know, object because they say, why is he allowing this tainted sinner to touch him? Doesn't he know what kind of a woman she is? And also, why she's wasting all this? Why is she not giving money to the poor rather than pouring oil, as expensive oils, on his feet? And this is the scene where, as you know, Jesus says, she has loved, for she has loved much, so much shall be forgiven her. And then he forgives her sins. A similar scene happens in the Gospel of St. John, but there it's in the house of Matthew, of Martha and Lazarus, and it's Mary, the sister of Martha, and that caused this conflation. I'm sure all of you who've been working on Mary Magdalene know that she's a composite figure of various different figures from the Gospels. One of them is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. The other one is this unnamed sinner who washes Jesus's feet. And then there's Mary Magdalene, out of whom 7 devils were expelled by Jesus, exorcised, but they all became a single figure. And the scene when in the house of Martha and Lazarus is very similar to the scene in the Pharisee's house. She washes his feet with her tears and dries them with her hair and pours spikenard over his feet. But it's there that it's Judas who says, why isn't she giving her money to the poor? And the implication down the centuries has been that money, her wealth, is because she has been selling her body. That is absolutely nowhere said in the Gospels. And it's simply an assumption that a woman who's become wealthy must be a prostitute. But of course, this is to be challenged. But it's the underlying thread and energy in the story that somehow female carnality is coming up against the ethereal virtue and purity of Jesus. And he's allowing this contact to happen, as he allowed the woman with 7 husbands, woman of Samaria, and also how he allowed the woman taken in adultery, and he said, let he who was without sin throw the first stone, and he writes that in the dust. So there's a thread in the Gospels about Jesus's acceptance of female sexuality, while all around him are not actually but that's as to assume that Mary Magdalene's sin, she's said to be a sinner, is something to do with sex. It's not ever specified, unlike the woman with 7 husbands. So, this is from John. So that takes that. Then the scene in John where she washes his feet, and Judas objects to the waste, ends with Jesus not saying her sins are forgiven her, as he said in the other scene, but let her alone, against the day of my burying has she kept this. So he makes the link of balm with embalming. And that's the other way, the other scene in which Mary Magdalene makes an appearance, a very important appearance in the Gospels as the witness of the resurrected Christ. She goes to the tomb with embalming ointment to anoint his body after he's been crucified. And she sees a man in the garden and she mistakes him for the gardener. And in this scene, the idea of touch is reversed, because Jesus says, she then recognizes him, she says, Rabboni, master, and he says, do not touch me, noli me tangere. And we don't know why. It's a reversal of the scene where he allows her to touch him, but maybe this is because he's now a resurrected body, and maybe she is still human body, is more carnal than he felt her to be before. But it's something that no doubt you are all interested in interpreting. It's a rather chilling moment, I think, compared to the earlier scene. So here's another version of it. You will have noticed, I think, by now that the jar is a definite character, a player, a strong player in these scenes. The artists lavish extraordinary attention on it. They invent amazing forms and decorations for it. And I became quite obsessed actually while pursuing this theme. And I realized quite soon that we're not looking here at representations of jars that were made by goldsmiths or by silversmiths or jewelers in the period when these artists were working. We're looking here at a series of symbolic images of Mary Magdalene herself and of her precious oils and what they mean. In Luke, it's actually specified that the jar is made of alabaster, a precious substance. And this is, I think, one of the only paintings in which it does look as if it is actually alabaster. But most of the time, they are magnificent works of goldsmithery. And this is, so she then becomes associated with the embalming of the body of Christ after she's been to the garden and seen the resurrected Christ. And we get a series of representations of her in which she is paired with Joseph of Arimathea, who is the other person who goes to the tomb, who lends his family tomb to the body of Christ. And so in a painting like this is the same artist, but here these are the wings of one triptych with Joseph of Arimathea on the right. He's carrying, in the Bible, he's got aloes and 70 pounds of ointment he takes with him to the tomb, and that it says so. And then this is another by the same artist, and you see again this is the deposition of Jesus from the cross, and you have Joseph of Arimathea rescuing the crown of thorns on the left, but with a shroud in which she's going to wrap Jesus, and Mary Magdalene on the right with her embalming fluid, opening the lid to show that she's about to use it. So yes, I thought I might read you a tiny bit about how I work this into the book. That my young mother was taught that a woman's body is dangerous, filled with powers that she could use. It radiated from her like a fragrance, but it was devil's work. She was an occasion of sin. Her dressing table displayed her scent bottles and cosmetic jars, some of them glass with silver lids, engraved with the coat of arms of her father-in-law. They had come from his gentleman's toiletry box. To her delight, she was given a bottle of Miss Dior for Christmas, the year it was newly created, to accompany the couturier's sensational post-war collections. Esmond, that's my father, couldn't afford the perfume itself or the eau de parfum, but only the eau de cologne, which was packaged in black and white houndstooth, a sporty touch, at variance with the light, heady perfume. Later, when Diorissimo came out in 1956, she switched. She was a mother of 2 daughters by then, and Miss Dio was for a bachelor girl. The priest in San Nicola, he was the patron saint of the town where she was born, whom the 14-year-old Elia heard giving the sermon on Magdalene's feast day, 25th of November, explained that Mary Magdalene pouring out the oil that was so expensive showed that what matters is love, not money. The Pharisees overvalued money when they muttered that she should have used her ill-gotten gains to feed the poor. Magdalene's tears gushed so profusely they made enough water to bathe the dusty feet of a man who had been walking in the hot desert and the stifling streets. Her hair flowed so abundantly she could use it as a towel, and then she lavished on him the oil and the kisses, and he liked it, he said. He said she was forgiven all her sins. The salve she did not stint on her beloved master was to bring about her salvation. But when they said she had loved much, did they mean she had slept around? It sounded like that. We women are all occasions of sin, Elia knew, the devil's gateway. The saints had been tempted and managed to resist the overtures of bevies of wanton girls. So in my quest, found actually that Mary Magdalene is associated with the very first, I think some of the earliest images I've come across in my whole life of looking at paintings of women writing, which is absolutely thrilling. And she's also using, in some of them, she's using a special instrument to keep the lines straight. So she's actually seems to be writing with 2 hands, if you like. This is sort of ruler that she's got here. But in these, which may be portraits, they may be patrons commissioning a portrait of their wife or themselves, as in the figure of the Magdalene, but showing that she. And so with the accoutrements of writing, which are very, very interesting, there's different, like the sand shaker to dry the ink, and blotters and things, and here more tools. There's always some elaborate jar. The theme becomes insistent. It becomes a sort of second nature. If you're going to reproduce Mary Magdalene, you need this objective correlative of her body, the elaborately beautiful, luxurious container. So it's the vessel, it's the body as vessel. And these are another examples of this kind of luxurious invention and imagination. You will all have come across, the idea of Mary as the immaculate vessel, the idea of, the idea of the body as a kind of integral container that mustn't be breached in the whole concept of virginity and the whole cult of virginity. So here we have a different, now this was the most remarkable of all the images that I found when I was looking in the Warburg collection, 4 representations of Mary Magdalene and her jar. And this is by a minor artist from the Marche, from a small town called Amatrice. He appears, for those of you who are interested in art history, he does appear in Vasari, Lives of the Artists, but Vasari doesn't rate him very highly, but he praises him, he praises the courage of his wife, because there was a lot of fighting in Amatrice. There were feuds between 2 gangs, a civil strife, and he fled with his wife, and she hurled herself from a cliff when they were being pursued. And by killing herself in that way, she distracted the pursuers, and they stopped in shock that she'd done that. And so she saved her husband's life. And Vasari tells this it's a rather gory and dramatic and tragic story. And when he tells the story of Cura della Matrice, and he attributes to Cura della Matrice's rather contorted and often grimacing figures, because he attributes that to the torments of his life, his unhappiness. Well, Mary Magdalene appears in the right wing with possibly Saint Gertrude. And I'm going to show you a close-up. In the middle, there is the Assumption of the Virgin, as you will all have recognized. So you have there the integral body, the uncorrupted body, no need of balm, no need of embalming, of Mary going up to heaven. she's letting drop her belt, her girdle, to in a sort of imitation of doubting Thomas, to prove to the apostles gathered here that she has corporeally in her clothes gone up to heaven. And on the right, you can see Mary Magdalene is looking up with a kind of slightly ecstatic look, actually, at this vision of the incorrupt body of the Virgin. There is a definite implication of contrast. So if you look more closely at how he's represented the jar, I hope you won't think that I'm just very dirty-minded and prurient, but it does seem to me to be the most extraordinary unconscious portrayal of sexuality. The folds of her dress, the color. I put in a very low res picture. I couldn't find a high res picture in color, but I wanted you to see the color because it has these flesh tones, and not only the scarlet, which has a tendency to express sinfulness, and I mean it also of course represents splendor and other things, but it has a carnality tone to it, and then the way that she's holding the jar and the kind of curiously phallic form of the jar. So it seemed to me that here you had it's absolutely probably not conscious. I think it was definitely unconscious, but a very strong hint that what we're looking at is some kind of picture of her sphere of experience and the promise of her body. The idea that saints oozed balm runs very deep. I was very delighted to find in the Princeton Museum this little portable reliquary, which has a hole in it that you can draw the manner, it's sometimes called manner, not balm, of the saint whose relics it is, and take it on cotton wool or a little file of it and take it home. This was something that happened in early antiquity and continued all the way through, obviously with different waves of interest, depending on what the controversies about relics were at the time. There was raging controversies, but the idea that a saint would ooze holy fluids was very, very powerful in Christian worship. And oddly enough, the Basilica of St. Nicholas, which is where my mother was born and brought up, has the body of St. Nicholas, which was brought from Myrrh. That's just a coincidence that it happened to come from Myrrh in Turkey now, and brought by relic hunters. And this beautiful cathedral was built for his relics. And he's still technically what's called a myroblite. His relics ooze myrrh or balm. And when you go to the church now, I went with my mother just the last visit she made to her hometown before she died. And I asked the priest if I could have some, and he gave me a little bottle of the balm of St. Nicholas. When I got home, I smelt it, didn't smell of anything. And then I very bravely tasted it, and it didn't taste of anything either. So now, of course, it's evaporated, so I don't have it anymore. But as you see, it comes in quite a nice little glass bottle. And so that's an example of holy balm associated with relics. And this is an example of secular balm. This was created in the Victorian era and was a very successful panacea for the consumptive habit, which was masturbation. And he, Mr. Leyland, and Solomon made a fortune out of it. So some of you will have thought immediately of some of you will have thought of the comparison with Pandora. It's interesting that Eve, Pandora, and Mary Magdalene have a kind of symbolic relationship to one another. They're associated quite strongly in various sort of symbolic ways. Pandora is the first woman of Greek myth, and she's identified by the jar or casket, or sometimes known as her box, Pandora's box, which she is given, in which all the ills of the world are contained. And like Eve, who was tempted, she opens her jar, and all these ills that have been closed inside by the gods fly out, except for hope. And hope remains, and as a kind of solace, if you like, a balm, a solace for humanity. This rather beautiful painting of the Fontainebleau School actually shows two jars, again, extraordinarily elaborate, sort of metonymies for another very beautiful, seductive woman. In some, this is also the idea that the jar and death are like the diptych on either side of the fatality of the female seductive body. Also turns up quite a lot in Mary Magdalene's images, but mostly when she's penitent after and in the cave. I don't know if there were any earlier that had her with the skull, but she does very frequently appear with the skull. The Victorians absolutely were totally inspired by Pandora. There are many, many, many paintings, Victorian paintings and Edwardian paintings of a young, innocent Pandora visiting disasters upon mankind when she opens the box. This is just one example. And I first sort of really came across this when a feminist artist in the 80s, Rose Garrard, I don't know if any of you remember her work. She worked very brilliantly with lots of women artists, and she did a whole sequence and a performance based on challenging this idea of the dangerous femme fatale with this metonymy of the box, as it were, the kind of genital symbol of the irresistible, dangerous body. Anytime you go through, I mean, I first noticed this really going through in the early mornings of some duty-free, when we used to do that. We don't do that anymore, but when we used to do that, that I would go past all these sirens and selling perfumes, and perfumes often with Oriental names, so that they would give you a hint of the pleasures of the East. And again, the scarlet is there so strongly. And samsara is actually a Sanskrit word meaning illusion, but it's got I don't think they mean you to understand it. I think they just want to create a kind of atmosphere of distance, Orientalism, pleasure, the kinds of things that were attracting my parents, who found it materially when they went to Egypt. Because there were lots of political blindnesses going on, but and it continues. I mean, this is a more recent one, if you like, and Shalimar is another kind of Orientalist title for a perfume. And here again, you have the juxtaposition of a woman with the idea of the scented irresistibility of her attractions. I was very interested that this was pointed out to me by a journalist who I met recently, that this very innovative young musician has created, I don't know if some of you have heard it, a new album called Magdalene, in which she says that that she was inspired because Mary Magdalene has been written about as a prostitute when she was a healer and a mystic who washed Christ's feet in rare and expensive oil. And so that's a kind of interesting, very contemporary, as you are doing, as the artists are doing here, response to this nexus of imagery around the figure, the perfume, the juice, the oil, and the beauty, the sexuality of sin, sinful sexuality, all attributed to a woman as if it was all done on, we all did it on our own. One of the most ironic and sort of sad things that I came across during this research is that Dadaab, the largest refugee encampment in the world, I think, until possibly the Jordanian ones now have taken over, Syrians, but it's over 300,000 people, mostly from Somalia, in Kenya. And it's known as the City of Thorns. And I went to hear Ben Rowlands, the author of the book, The City of Thorns, which is a wonderful book of interviews with people living in the camp. And I asked him, what are the thorns? And he said, they're commiphera. And so by one of these vicious twists of fate, commiphera Myrrh, this source of one of the great luxurious sensual delights of the world, has become the fencing and the demarcation lines for people living in this refugee camp. They're no longer harvesting the myrrh, they're using it as a kind of organic barbed wire. To go back to the holy tree, because it's quite interesting, Mataria, where the Balm, the garden of the true balsam is part of a pilgrimage route. It's on this map. You can see it there in the middle. There. An extremely detailed cartography of the flight into Egypt that is marked by pilgrimage sites. Some of them still active, and some of them obviously less so. And actually, the whole situation in the Middle East has become so volatile that these kinds of festivals that were celebrated in these pilgrimage sites, I don't know what's happening to them. Since I started this research, I wanted to go, but I haven't been able to. The rest on the flight into Egypt, which takes place in that garden of the true balm, has inspired many marvelous paintings and many apocryphal gospels. So, and sometimes the paintings reproduce elements in the apocryphal gospels, the kind of plethora of marvelous stories that grew up around these pilgrimage sites. People attributing, something that I like very much as a process, people attributing narratives to places, which kind of enriches them and gives them more character, more living connection to the present. And in this, so the tree is meant to have been miraculously produced by angels, and a spring appeared also to feed the royal family, the holy family. And the angels bent down the tree, and in a tiny detail, apparently because she was given dates by the angel, and she exclaimed in pleasure at the sight of the dates, the date stone still has a little O on it, which is the word the Virgin Mary exclaimed when she bit into a date, and it was delicious. Oh, she said, and it's written on the date stone, according to one of the legends. But another of the legends is that, that when the spring, the miraculous spring appeared, they washed the baby's clothes. And for quite a while, there used to be relics of Jesus's clothes, his swaddling bands, and so forth. And so here you see in the Veronese painting, you see Jesus's clothes laid out to dry on, I think, one of the bushes, not exactly a thorn tree, but one of the bushes. This is quite unusual for the paintings of the rest on the flight into Egypt to show Egypt. But in this painting, you see, because the 18th century, by then many travelers had been, and you see that there's a pyramid and there are various approximations rather approximate of the Egyptian landscape. This is the shrine today. So this is the Garden of the True Balsam today. You can see on the left that the original gateway is very old. This is sort of 13th century, very not Romanesque, but it's been done up. Oddly enough, it was done up under Mubarak and his wife, Suzanne Mubarak. There's a plaque to her for thanking her for the restoration. So there's some contemporary artwork at the site. There's the holy well, is still there, dry when I went, no water in it. It is now, of course, in the middle of Cairo. You can see the city is encroached all around it, and the pharaoh's fig tree is still there, and it's obviously an extremely ancient tree. I'm not saying it is the one that was there, or indeed that the Holy Family were there, but it's a very, very ancient tree, and it does have a certain frisson, it must be said. But it's quite a moving sight, a connection to a deep past. And what is important about these sites is that they're shared, because they're shared between Muslims and Christians. The pilgrimages are shared because the Mary has a whole chapter to herself in the Quran, and she's much revered in the Quranic, by the Muslim faith, and some of these cult sites have been run by Coptic, the Copts, the Egyptian Christian Church, and the Muslims together for quite a while. Not so much now. I mean, unfortunately, the whole tendency of the world is sort of splitting apart. But for a long time, there were monks, both Christian and Muslim, looking after this particular shrine and selling the myrrh. So then to go back to my book. When in my book, my mother has a kind of initiation into her potential as a powerful woman in contact with this shrine. It's a kind of epiphany for her. And then, so in 1952, there was a nationalist uprising, Arab uprising against foreign interests, particularly British. The British had been the major power alongside the French, and I have to say, according to the historical record, extraordinarily obtuse, arrogant, and exploitative. And so gradually, there'd been uprisings since independence in 1919, but it had gone on and gone on and on, gone on. And eventually, in 1952, there was a very unexplained revolution. Nobody still knows how it was organized or who was behind it exactly. And most of downtown Cairo, most of the, all the sort of foreign premises, the Rolls-Royce showrooms, the bars, the cinemas, the theaters, the nightclubs, the hotels, all the sort of watering holes and, what was thought of as vice, they were all targeted. And my father's bookshop, as a British bookshop, and it also had French books. It had some Arabic books actually, but it was also targeted. And this is the bookshop after that fire was set fire to. And this is amongst my earliest memories, which is one of the original triggers for the book. That I remember my father took me to see the burned out bookshop. And all that was left, I didn't remember it looking like this. This is the photograph, but I remembered a pile of ash, the frame of the actual girders with a pile of ash in the middle. And in the middle of the pile of ash, the bowl of the lavatory, which hadn't burned. That was one of my earliest memories. And of course, my father was extraordinarily upset. And I do remember my father being upset. I wasn't particularly upset, but I was upset that he was upset. And soon after that, we left. I tried to, one of the things I was trying to do in the book was actually become this figure that you will have seen in many museum collections, the Chabtis. Chabtis are put in the tomb. Sometimes there will be 365, so that there will be one for every day of the year. And the Chabtis means answerer. And the answerer is the person who works for the dead on their behalf in the afterlife and listens out for them and does things for them so that their afterlife is kind of pleasant. And this is, the Chabti says, here they're inscribed with this spell. Each figure is inscribed with a spell which says, "Here I am, you shall say, when you are summoned at any time." And so they work to do the work for the dead. Now, indeed, when you face these tasks, you shall say, "Here I am." And that's what I was trying to do in a way. I was trying to listen it out for the ghosts of my mother and my father, and somehow give them back to at least my reality. And that was successful. I mean, for me, they have been incredibly more real than they were for a while. And I really found it a very rewarding, though at times extraordinarily painful task of opening these objects and trying to follow these tracks. And so that was, the book is illustrated by Sophie Herxheimer with wonderful vignettes, I think, these cutouts. And I felt rather that this was for me a talismanic phrase. Wounds heal on the body, but in the archive they always stay open. And that comes from José Saramago, the Portuguese novelist, All the Names. And so it's interesting that for me, the book acted as a kind of balm, acted as a kind of solace on these, but while the wounds were being reopened. the wounds of my parents' extremely malfunctioning marriage and the failure of my father's life, really, because he never really succeeded much after this bookshop was burned down. So that so this was a way of both returning to the archive where the wounds are kept open, and then pouring the balm of all these stories, all these ways of patterning the past, of symbolizing the dangers, of thinking about men and women and conflict, and coming to a different place afterwards. I think that is one of the functions of art, really. Okay, so that's the book, and that's Us Leaving by Sophie. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, that's just. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina, for that extraordinary, rich and beautiful visual presentation that you've just given us. It was really extraordinary. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so glad to have you as part of this research program. It's just wonderful. I know that we have a number of questions that are sitting there in our Q&A. I'd like to maybe start with one of our artists, Alice Maher,
Yes.
who has a question for you. And then also, if anybody would like to just type in your questions to the Q&A, we have approximately about 20 minutes of time. So please do, and hopefully we'll get through some of your questions.
Is Alice going to ask it? Are you going to speak it?
Alice,
Yes. Can you hear me? Can
yes,
you hear me?
yes.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for that. I cannot wait to get the book, and I want
thank you.
I want to go to Egypt as soon as possible. But could I ask you, Marina, if you could draw a connection between the classical figure of Myrrh, from Greek myths, who was transformed into that myrrh tree because of a carnal transgression, and you could draw a kind of connection maybe between her and this biblical figure of Magdalene, who's weeping, all the time weeping and seeping and carrying this liquid with her. And if she perhaps is a direct connection between this, early mythological figure and this collective creation figure in the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, oddly enough, I think I might go back to my images because, if you don't mind, because I've got some of Myrrh. I thought there wouldn't be time. Let me just show you quickly.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is it coming? Is it coming? Can you see it?
Yes.
Because I completely agree with you. I haven't been able to establish anything. I haven't found anything that anybody's worked on these. Have you? Have you found anything?
No. Separately, I was working myself with a dance group on the figure of Myrrh.
Yes.
But it seemed as if we very much see it through our own kind of, what would you call it, like our Catholic teaching of punishment, that it's like a punishment changed into a tree.
Yes.
But like there may be another reading of it, that to become nature, and to actually to metamorphose, into liquid.
Well, I thought there was a connection between myrrh as an embalming agent and the fact that incest is a kind of way of stopping time.
Yeah.
I mean that she because if you deny the generational succession. In fact, I wrote quite a lot about incest in something, and that seemed to be almost the main theme, that the transgression was not obeying the natural law of decay and going, a progression.
Yes.
The generational progression. But the reason I wanted to show you the image, which you probably know, and these are not very good because they're.
I see. Yes, I see the baby coming out of the tree.
Yes. Here the baby's coming out of the tree too.
Yeah.
Perhaps you should say, Alice, the story for those people who
Well,
don't
the
know it.
story, it's told in many different ways, but the short story is that Myrrh was tricked actually into having an incestuous relationship by the gods, of course, with her own father, by whom she became pregnant. And when he realized, of course, he didn't, realize that was his daughter. He thought it was some young slave girl or maid, and that was okay, of course, to spend 9 nights with her. But then he turned on the light one night and discovered that it was his own daughter. So he went into a fury and produced his weapon and chased her throughout the world, I believe. And then when he was just about to reach and kill her, she cried out to the gods for help, that and they transformed her into a tree, which is used in many, many different myths where women become trees to escape either rape. It's usually like a rape scenario,
Yes,
or
like
something like that,
Daphne,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So then she's
Yes.
transformed into a tree. But I'm not too sure what happens after that, Marina. I mean,
Oh, I see. Well, she gives birth to Adonis.
and
You see, she gives
Adonis,
birth to Adonis, who is who's the
man
most
in the
beautiful,
world. Yeah.
exactly, the most beautiful man in the world, who
Yeah.
is then the love object of Venus, and dies himself, gored by a boar.
Yeah. So he's a product of
and then he becomes an anemone.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Which is meant to be a flower spotted with blood.
Yeah.
So, and you see in this painting, there's this very suggestive nymph kind of pointing to her, to where she's just given birth. But I mean, it's quite explicit. But interestingly, I found on the web when I was looking for these things, this image, which is why I thought I'd show you my image, because this artist who's got this strange name, Olympic Dames or Olympic Dames. I don't know. I haven't found out. This artist, who I think is a man, but has done a lot of mythological figures. But you will see that his figure of Myrrh actually uses the commiphora tree. He's actually gone back to that landscape of these thorn trees.
Yes.
To show her travailing in her as she gives birth.
Yes.
So yes. So I think it's a very fruitful thing to do, and there could be, who knows? I mean, I don't know what Ovid's sources are for the Myrrh story.
Yeah.
Myrrh also is associated with words for bitterness.
Yes.
So there's
but also the weeping, I thought as well, that there was a connection there with the weeping Magdalene, because her tears are precious.
Yes.
It's like they're actually precious liquid.
Yes, yes.
So I really saw that kind of connection, but also, of course, the carnal connection. But
yes.
Anyway.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marina, we have a few other questions.
Yes,
are you okay? So one of the questions from Christina is, has Marina come across The Meaning of Mary Magdalene by Cynthia Bourgeois? She explores the idea of Mary as a composite figure, but comes down on the side of saying that there was probably a real woman who became Jesus's soulmate and who with Jesus developed his extraordinary theology and teachings about love.
Yes, well, I think that's a marvelous comment. I actually haven't read the Bourgeois. I've been told about it before, but I haven't yet read it. And but the idea that Mary Magdalene was Jesus's wife has been very much explored, because I'm sure that, sorry, I've lost her name now. The person who asked the question knows about all these gospels, all these apocryphal gospels, in which Mary Magdalene really figures as a teacher, a sage, the sole companion of, as she said, the sole companion of Jesus, and his consort, his wife, and there are very different attitudes to sex and all kinds of things in these Gnostic gospels. One of them is called the Gospel of Philip and Mary, but there are others, and there've been there's been a lot of it. Some of it's a bit cranky, the whole cult in the south of France around. Do you know where I mean? Sorry, I've lost the name now.
Yeah, Aix-en-Provence.
Yes. Where they believe
we did some work
that Jesus didn't die, that he left Palestine with Mary Magdalene, and they set up in the south of France. And there's a little town now, which is the center of an amazingly a powerful cult. I mean, it's absolutely mobbed. What's it called? I've even been there. Anyway, and it's sort of slightly connected to Les Saintes Maries de la Mer, which is one of the places, you know, Mary Magdalene is meant to have drifted in a rudderless boat to the south of France, and there they created this town, which is called Les Saintes Maries de la Mer. She was with 2 other Marys, and 3 Marys in the boat. All that is wonderful folklore, wonderful legends, and very rich material. And then she retired to the mountain, which is known as La Sainte Baume, Holy Balm, La Sainte Baume. And that's where she lived in the cave, when she was, you know, fed by angels and clothed only in her hair. And she repented her wicked life of luxury. I didn't get into all that part of the story. I would have taken another lecture. But she's yes, I mean, she's extraordinarily mythopoeic. I mean, she engendered so many stories. But I agree with the point that the questioner made, that there's a sort of theology of love that transcends the puritanical one that most of us were brought up in, which of course caused the Magdalene laundries and the scandal of all that vilification and stigmatization of women.
Fantastic. Sorry, I'm just looking, we have so many questions coming in here. Okay, from Carlotta, we're going to take a question from Carlotta. I know that we have a lot to get through here, and I know that Jessie Jones, one of our artists, wants to come in as well. So I'm going to do Carlotta's question first of all. So Carlotta said, thank you so much for this talk and for your extraordinary work. In my PhD, I'm studying feminist retellings of the Bible written by women in the Italian 16th century. I noticed that many of the images you shared with us were created precisely in this period. I was wondering if there's something about the depictions of Magdalene around this time that you find particularly fascinating.
Well, I think that's a marvelous topic you're doing in your PhD. That's really interesting and good. I know that there's a series of texts that are being published in English of women of that period. And there are quite a lot of writers. I mean, most of them religious writers, but often combative religious writers. I can't remember any of their names. You probably know them, you've studied them. But I think there is a connection. I was very struck by these pictures of women writing. You know, it's not very, I mean, the literacy was, I mean, obviously these are portraits of elite women, but part of being elite was that they can write. So these are humanist ideals, but we are including women, which was not always the case. So, you know, I think that's striking and interesting. Also, those particular portraits, the master of the half-lengths, we don't know who he is, or could be a woman, of course. We don't, I mean, it's assumed it's master of the half-lengths, but there's no reason to think that it's a man. They're all into domestic interiors. So these are not religious women. I mean, they're being portrayed as Mary Magdalene, or the paintings are called Mary Magdalene, but there are lots of them. I mean, if you look online, you'll see it's a whole trope, and this is obviously considered a very perfect way of being for a woman who has a household and who, you know, is a kind of mistress of her household, that she should be at a desk writing. If you like, you could say, I mean, I'm just now, you know, just extemporizing, but you could say that in a way, I don't think in any of those portraits, the vase is open. You know, she's not lifting the lid. She's not looking at you with a kind of complicit look. The jar is standing on her desk, you know, closed. I think that's true of all of them, actually. So there's, in a sense, that there's a contrast between Mary Magdalene, the saint who opens her jar and looks seductively at you, and this domestic ideal woman who's at her desk writing, who has contained her jar. She's got it under control. I'm just extemporizing. But it's interesting for you. I mean, your project is interesting, very interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marina. I'm going to bring in Jessie Jones now, one of our
Yes, yes.
artists.
You've got
to
a
ask a
panda.
question.
She's got a panda.
Oh. Hi, Marina. Hi, Marina.
Hello,
Yeah,
hello.
I'm a panda. Thank you for such a really fascinating talk. Myself and the other artists in the series have been looking so much at images of Mary Magdalene for the last year. And what really strikes me is, you know, from your talk as well, thinking about how these images really construct an idea of female sexuality in and around the time of the 17th century and the rise of the Magdalene cult around then. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, like, you spoke a bit about Twigs earlier, the musician that has this new album, Magdalene, and how Mary Magdalene is really appearing a lot in
Yes.
popular culture at the moment. I'm just wondering, for you, like, as a feminist, how do you feel, what do you feel Mary Magdalene can represent to us now as women and as feminists, in terms of what a representation can mean to us now in a way that produces ourselves differently in relationship to some of these more oppressive histories around religion? I mean, obviously in Ireland we have such a stark example in relationship to the Magdalene laundries, and I'm just wondering, like, what can we hold on to about this character or this figure that can lead to a way of looking back at that in a way that is more emancipatory for us and our sexual.
Yes, well, I mean, I think that she's extraordinarily important. I mean, for example, you know, the fact that she's the first witness of the resurrection, and, you know, does give her a kind of preeminent role, which I think is what the Apocrypha latched onto. I mean, these Apocrypha that have been, these Gnostic Gospels, they appreciated that she had this. She's apart from the apostles, she's the one he chooses to show himself to. So I mean, but my approach to these religious stories is not one of a believer anymore. I know what it is to believe. I believed for a long time, so I can live in both mindsets. But I see them as entirely mythical accretions, and therefore we are free to maneuver wherever we wish. We're not looking for the truth that happened at a certain time. There isn't an truth for me in my position as a now non-believer. So there's two approaches, if you like. I mean, if you're a believer, you want the scriptures to be giving a truth, and that would be that she's the first witness of the resurrection, and this is an argument for the priesthood of women, for example. If I was a theologian now within the church, I would argue that, you know, that if he chooses to show himself to a woman first, then he must think women are worthy of representing him, of taking his message. So that would, you know, that would be a theological argument. But if you're a writer of mythology, the way I am, it's much more to do with how you can be fed, nourished, and indeed consoled by these, you know, wonderfully rich figures that can take you down marvelous pathways and open great horizons. You know, I think, I mean, I just find many. I love the saints. You know, I'm thinking that one of the things that we needed in lockdown was to have a kind of wild story about a saint every day. You know how we used to have them, of course, but we were required to believe them. But now we don't have. I mean, that's what I'm saying is that, but they kind of make each day strange and wonderful. Saints who can fly, saints who can cure. You know, bring babies back to life. I wonder. I don't know. It's I'm thinking of writing a calendar of saints, actually. I thought some of them would be contemporary saints. Sorry, that's rather a rambling answer. I can't see you. It's always a shame I can't see you.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Marina, and I totally agree with you. I'm really finding saints and their bodies and what their bodies can do so inspiring in this time of lockdown, you know.
Thank you. I actually reviewed a book which I really enjoyed, by Elliot Weinberger. He's a poet in America, and it's called Angels and Saints. And he collected some really extraordinary examples. There's first an essay about angels, in which he moves from a position of sort of skepticism into a kind of great flight of imagination about angels. And then the second half is on saints, and he collected a lot of very, very amazing stories. Some of them quite recent.
Wonderful, Marina. Thank you. And
Thank you.
hopefully once this is all over, you will be able to come and see us in person. I'm going to go to Tina Kinsela's question now, because I know that Tina, I know that I seen her at one of your talks in Dublin, and she's a big fan of yours as well. So Tina said, I would like to ask Marina about one of her last slides about wounds healing on the body and remaining open in the archive. I'm really interested in this idea of healing or not healing. A few years ago, I attended a talk by Richard Kearney when he spoke about catharsis in relation to wounds. I'm wondering really about the wound that weeps, the scar that is evidence of the wound, and also the mark of a wound. I suppose what I would really like to hear is Marina's thoughts regarding the weeping Mary Magdalene and her association with Myrrh as a healing balm, and balm as the tears of the tree.
Also, of course, I don't know if I said that phrase, that this sort of, this heavenly respite, this solace that comes from the tree is created by a wound in the tree. So there's a definite, these are the tears, as Tina is saying, these are the tears of the tree. So that's part of the kind of mystery of the whole thing. I'm interested you mentioned Richard Kearney, because actually I used to know him. I haven't seen him for ages, and I always very much liked his take on things. So is he still in Boston? I mean, where did you hear him lecture about the wounds?
Maybe Tina will put that into the chat for us, because unfortunately we can't bring Tina online here too.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yes, maybe she can tell us. Anyway, so well, I think that this is, again, is a very, this is a complicated but very fertile, inspirational theme. As you know, I mean, and as the idea of the kind of the exuding relics, they're not bleeding blood and they're not weeping tears, they're exuding holy, scented kind of balm, those manna producing saints. But the idea of the active body is important. Actually, there's a slight contradiction with the whole idea of balm, because embalming stops the weeping. I mean, it's and actually it also, as a resin, it literally, stops the decay. I mean, it's those bodies of the mummies have been embalmed, and actually some Christian saints are embalmed. I mean, they say that they're incorrupt, and because of their sanctity, but they've been embalmed. And Bernadette is still in her body, but she's embalmed, and I've seen others actually in churches. So it's a way of stopping time, stopping the flow, stopping the body's tendencies and organic belonging to time. It's an attempt to stall time. So it is the idea of a closed wound. But you're right to be interested in scars. I mean, that's, this yes. I mean, in a sense, a lot of what we try to write about when we examine the past in any way at all, we're looking at scars, and that's the trace. In fact, there was somebody who wrote a rather extraordinary piece about how writing itself was a kind of scarring. It was a kind of like like you opened a wound when you wrote, and then it closed up in the book, and the book was itself a sort of scar. I mean, the Saramago quote is very suggestive and deep and difficult, because we don't, I mean, heavens, if we're talking to Ireland, we don't want to keep all the wounds open. But at the same time, we don't want to forget. We don't want the scar. I mean, we need the scar to remind us what must not be again. I mean, I've always quoted something that's very familiar to you all, which is Kearney saying that what matters is not the grievance or the grudge, but the grief. And I think that writing, you know, almost about anything, can be an act of opening a wound for the grief, to remember the grief, but not to stoke the grievance, not to create more grounds for grudge. I think that, you know, what you were saying, what your earlier questioner said about Mary Magdalene as a source of new thinking, that was Jessie, yes, of new thinking. That's a good example, that you can open up the arguments about how she's been used to instrumentalize condemnation of women. You can remember it, but then you can move on from that, not to just keep harping on that, but to show that there is a potential for other ways of thinking about the powers that she expresses, the potential she expresses.
Brilliant, Marina, and I know that Tina has responded there by saying that is exactly it, and thank you to Marina. Marina, I would say that we could go on all night with questions, but I'm aware of your time. So maybe what we should do as well is that I think we'll continue on the questions we can carry on Twitter. But perhaps for now we should let you get on with your Friday evening. Marina, thank you so much. I've enjoyed your talk so much. I'm so glad that I met you in 2014. I'm so glad that Roger Malvert introduced us and said, would you like to go for lunch with Marina Warner? And I think my face said it all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You make it very worthwhile to try and do all this. Thank you so much. You really do. Thank you.
Hopefully, Marina, when things get back to some kind of normality, we will have you over here in Rua Red so that you can actually experience the Magdalene series here by the artists that are present this evening. And we will very much keep in touch with you from here on then. So thank you. There's lots of thanks here in the chat.
Yes,
and the Q&A section. So thank you so much, Marina Warner.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye then. I don't know. I would love a copy of the chat questions. Is it possible for you to keep the chat questions and send them to me?
Absolutely.
Because I would love to see read them properly. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll copy them for you, Marina. No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for attending tonight as well.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.